This is more than just ghost stories. These are experiences people live with every day. At Paranormal M, we believe them. Subscribe and understand why. The Hand in the Dark. I was never afraid of the dark until that night. Back when I was a teenager, I used to spend my summers at my aunt's place. Her household was deeply ritualistic. Incense every morning and evening chants, the works. There was always something heavy in the air, like the house was holding its breath, and I couldn't explain it. But I felt it every time I visited there. My little cousin, only 6 years old back then, used to insist that there was a ghost hiding inside the wardrobe of the upstairs guest room. Naturally, the adults laughed it off, and kids do say things, right? One evening, the ground floor bathroom was occupied, and I had reached the point of no return. Against the unspoken rules of guests staying downstairs, I bolted upstairs to find the other washroom. The moment my foot hit the top step, everything was swallowed by darkness. Not the hum of the ceiling fan, not a dog with itchy ears, no flicker of light, just silence that pressed against my ears. I groped for the light switch. I was tapping every button on the panel, but none seemed to work. My stomach twisted with urgency. So I forced myself to cross the hallway in the pitch black. That's when it started. First, the prickle on the back of my neck like a spider had crawled across my skin. Then my hair began to rise strand by strand, as though the air itself was charged with static. I tried to laugh it off as my imagination. I reached the bathroom door, fumbling for the switch outside. My heart pounded as I pressed random buttons, praying one would bring me even a shred of light. But instead I felt it. The undeniable presence of someone or something standing directly behind me. It wasn't just a feeling. It was a weight, like a shadow pressing down, and then it happened. A hand, a solid, heavy hand, clamped onto my shoulder. I spun around and there was nothing, just this suffocating blackness. I didn't wait for a second chance. I tore down the hallway, stumbled down those stairs, nearly crashing into the banister in my panic. When I burst into the living room, gasping, I tried to explain. They all stared at me, like I was telling ghost stories at a campfire. But I knew from that night onward, I never doubted my cousin's warnings about the wardrobe ghost. Some things aren't just childhood imaginations. The woman at the stairs. When I was about 9, I began having the same recurring dream. In the dream, I'm lying on the couch in our living room, where you could see the staircase clearly from where my head rested. At the bottom of the stairs stood a woman. She wasn't quite alive, though not quite dead either. Her skin was pale like candle wax, long black hair hanging stiff, and eyes so dark they almost swallowed the light. Her mouth was slightly open, as though she was about to speak but never found the words. In the dream, I could never move. My body was heavy, locked in place. My only freedom being sort of to glance around in dread. She never walked closer in any way I could see. But each night, she was nearer than before. First, only peering through the banisters, then standing at the foot of the stairs, and finally, looming inches from my face. The night she reached me, so close I could see the cracks in her lips, the dreams ended. Just like that, they stopped, never returned. Even now, years later, I avoid passing the staircase in the dark. She never touched me, never harmed me, but her presence lingered long enough that I still wonder, Was she only a dream, or something that chose to stop once it had seen me up close? Or saw you brandishing some... Well, I was going to say something more clever, but... name brand chapstick. I swear, this freaked me out more than anything. So I'm coasting downhill on my bike late at night. The road was stretching endlessly empty on both directions. Out of nowhere, I spotted somebody walking ahead of me. Just one lone figure in the middle of the road, and it instantly gave me this uneasy feeling. A feeling like we shouldn't have been the only two souls out there. As I got closer, I blinked for maybe half a second. And when my eyes refocused, they were gone, like completely gone. I hit the brakes so hard my tires screeched, and I scanned the road and the dirt shoulders, even the train tracks that ran alongside. Nothing. No person, no movement. Not even the sound of footsteps fading away. The place was wide open. No trees, no cars, nowhere to hide. I even walked back up the hill with my bike, half expecting to catch somebody crouching low, but there was absolutely no sign of life, just wind and empty land. So now I'm left asking, was it a random hiker who hit the ground flat as a pancake in some camo jacket? Did I stumble across somebody with a military-grade invisibility cloak, or worse, one of those fantasy hobbit cloaks that turn you into a boulder? Or is my brain just playing tricks on me? Did my mind conjure up a phantom person out of shadows and moonlight? I mean, I know what I saw. I put money on it being a human figure. I don't even believe in ghosts, is kind of the weird thing. Not at all, actually. I keep telling myself it must have been some kind of hallucination, or maybe a mirage caused by exhaustion. Still, I can't shake how bone-chilling it was, because I'm 100% convinced I wasn't just imagining it. Has anybody else had something like this happen? Cookies in the hallway. This happened close to 2 decades ago now, and while plenty of details in life do blur over time, this one never really left me. I've always been sensitive and able to hear and smell and feel things beyond the ordinary. But this encounter stood out because somebody else had confirmed it, at least in a way. I had just moved into a shared rental with a couple and 2 other housemates. It was a ramshackle old place with 1 room upstairs and 3 below. The upstairs room had a hallway outside it that frequently smelled like somebody was baking sugar cookies. And not faintly either. Rich and warm, straight out of the oven cookies. The weird part is, no one was ever baking anything. And the tenant in that upstairs room was a notoriously messy guy whose room smelled like dirty laundry and wet socks. Not pastries. I lived downstairs, but my computer was kind of set up in the tiny office upstairs, and I worked evenings. I was usually on the computer late into the night, actually. Almost every night, I'd feel a presence behind me moving from the doorway to right up close, like somebody leaning over my shoulder to see what I was doing on the screen. It wasn't hostile, just insistent, and oddly, whenever I opened something personal, like online banking or emails, or late-night browsing, you could call it, of the less wholesome kind. I already got it before. The presence would instantly back off like it respected boundaries. One night, I mentioned it to a long-term tenant. We were having a cigarette outside, and as I described the feeling, she went pale and said, "That sounds exactly like Sam." Well, I asked who Sam was. She explained that he'd been a close friend and a former housemate. They passed away in that upstairs bedroom after a diabetic coma a couple of years before I moved in. And apparently, Sam had this habit of standing over people's shoulders while they were on their computers. Unless they were looking at something private, then he'd politely wander off. After that, whenever I felt the presence, I'd just say, "Hey, Sam." Sometimes even joke about him snooping, and if I was reading horror stories and getting too jittery, I'd ask him to give me some space. Feeling would just vanish instantly. The strangest night came when I headed downstairs to my room. At the foot of the stairs, I suddenly felt something rushing at me, like a violent wall of wind and pressure and thick with malice. My chest clenched in panic, and then just as quickly, I felt Sam barrel down the stairs and chase it off. The crushing pressure disappeared in an instant, and I whispered, "Thanks, Sam," and went to bed. Whatever that darker thing was never came back. About a year later, the house gets sold and scheduled for demolition, and it's my last night there. I told Sam he was welcome to come with me if he wanted to, but never did feel him again. My guess is he chose to stick with the couple he'd been closest to, or maybe he finally found his way onwards. Either way, I still think of him sometimes, especially when I catch the smell of cookies or there shouldn't be any. The night of the hammered wall. When I was still living back in my home country, strange things, I always seemed to stir around our old house in the woods. At first, it was nothing unusual, just scratches and rustling and the occasional grunt of a wild boar slipping past the fences. But one particular night, it changed everything. It was near midnight. I was waiting for the family to come home, and I was alone in the living room with the television humming in the background. I heard something rummaging in the kitchen. The kitchen was connected to a narrow shed that opened outside, and if the latch wasn't tight, animals could sneak in. I figured it was a hawk again, but the sound stopped suddenly. Then to my horror, the shed door creaked. It didn't push open, but unlocked. A man, not an animal, slipped inside. He prowled about as if searching for something, and I stayed frozen with my heart pounding until he finally disappeared. Months later, it happened again. That night, my grandmother was staying over, and I was nearly relieved to be alone. But the noise returned, not from the kitchen this time, but from the shed's thin metal roof. Something was moving across it and heavy enough to bend the panels, and I told myself it just must be a stray cat. Deep down, I think I knew better. Later, when my family came back, the house settled into silence and everybody drifted to sleep except me. Then a sudden bang, so loud it rattled the whole house, and for a moment I thought it was maybe an earthquake. But it didn't fade. The pounding went on, and I braced myself, waiting for my parents to rush out, but no one seemed to stir. The next morning when I asked, they claimed they hadn't heard a thing. Only my grandmother admitted that she had. Although I think she dismissed it as it maybe being my cat or something. But my sister, who slept upstairs, thought she'd been dreaming. But when I went to the balcony, I found the truth carved into the wall. Deep marks as if somebody had been hammering at it. Not long after, while visiting the local library, I overheard a man speaking about similar disturbances. I interrupted, blurting out that the same had happened to me. He wasn't surprised and said plenty of villagers had seen stranger things. People whispered that in 2008, a group of so-called black magic monks had been arrested for grave robbing. Some believed that they had cursed the village, unleashing wandering spirits. And considering there is a neglected cemetery just across from my house, it really wasn't that hard to believe. Neighbors swore they'd seen smoke-like figures drifting between the trees. I never saw them myself, but my cousin once told me he'd spotted a man in black trying to slip into her shed late one night. Assumed it was me. To this day, no one has explained the hammering or the prowlers. My grandmother still lives there with my aunt, carrying on as though the house is perfectly ordinary. But for me, the memory of that balcony wall, scarred in the night, remains sharp and unshakable. The things that walk the border woods. I'm 18 now. I've lived all my life in a small rural town, right on the edge of Ohio on the Kentucky border. Behind our property are 2 massive tracts of forest, thick with brush and hardly ever touched by hunters because they're both private lands. Other than me and the family that owns it, no one goes out there. Just to be clear, I'm not trespassing. They've told me they don't mind people walking the land. The wildlife around here isn't really anything out of the ordinary for southern Indiana. I mean, we'll see deer and coyotes and raccoons, and once in a blue moon, a stray black bear just wandering out of Kentucky. Every so often, a red fox darts through the brush, but I've also seen things here that don't fit with the usual, you could say. I've been trying for years to make sense of it. My first story is called The Thrown Log. The first time something truly strange happened, I was about 9. My dad and I had just finished clearing a stretch of brush and moved this heavy log, maybe 50 or 60 pounds, into a pile by the tree line. It had taken both of us to haul it. The next morning, waiting for the bus, I heard rustling and a low growl from that same area. At first, I figured it was just a coyote after a rabbit, maybe. But when I finally turned to look, I froze. That same log we'd carried the day before came shooting straight up out of the brush, spinning in the air before crashing halfway across the yard, closer to me than it had any business being. I didn't see what or who threw it. I only remember staring at the log and nearly missing my bus. My second story is The Giant in the Yard. A couple of years later, I was maybe 11. I had 2 friends staying the night. My bedroom window on the second floor looks out over most of the yard and parts of the woods. It was late. We were just about to crash for the night. That's when I noticed movement outside. A person was walking along the edge of the property, and they were huge. I'd guess anywhere from 6 to 8 feet tall, but bulky and broad-shouldered and unnervingly quiet. We were all alone. Nobody was supposed to be out there. My friend saw it too. We ducked away from the window and didn't look back until morning. My third story is The Clearing. The last encounter happened just a few years ago. I was jogging through the woods about a mile past where most people would bother going. To get there, you have to kind of fight through thick thorn bushes and toppled trees. I broke through into a small clearing. I noticed the silence first. No birds, no wind, and then came the sound of heavy branches snapping somewhere to my left. I crouched down with the knife I always carried for brush. That's when it stepped out, a towering figure covered in mottled fur, mostly black but streaked with brown and patchy tan, like the coat of a stray dog or some kind of wild hybrid. It sprinted upright across the clearing, moving faster than anything that size should be able to. I stayed hidden until the sounds faded. But hours later, I heard gunshots from the direction it had run to, and an old neighbor lived that way. A man known to shoot at anything. And what's happening now? Well, I thought that'd be the end of it, but the weirdness hasn't stopped, because in winter I found massive footprints in the snow. I hear tree knocks at night, and sometimes in patterns, and sometimes closer than they should be. Twice, something slammed into the side of our house hard enough to rattle the windows. And the stray cats that used to roam this place, they've almost all disappeared. I actually just made this count just to post this, and I don't know what I've been seeing, and I don't know if it's just one creature or several or something I can't even name. But whatever it is, it's still out there. Beaver nuggets. The house on Maple Lane. For context, I live alone, except for weeks when my 6-year-old daughter stays with me. I bought my house back in 2018, and odd things began in early 2020, like lights flickering on and off and doors unlatching themselves, and my daughter's baby toys chirping without batteries. My ex and I were separated late 2020, named the presence Linda, and, well, she seemed harmless. I asked her politely to cut it out with the doors and the toys, and for a while it seemed that she did. In 2021, my friend moved in for a few months, and she swore that she heard footsteps pacing in the hallway at night, and didn't bother me, and I just let Linda wander. But 2022, I was dating somebody cruel and kind of manipulative. The house's energy grew heavy, and shadows just flitted across the rooms. I told myself it was connected to him. That's when things turned darker. I've had sleep paralysis since childhood, but one morning it felt different. I was pinned in bed and I was paralyzed, with my boyfriend asleep beside me too. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, a faceless woman with long silver hair and chalk white skin and a black dress. She climbed onto me, pressing the breath out of my chest. Desperate, I fought against the paralysis and I cursed at her, and without knowing why, I screamed the name Anna, and instantly she vanished. I never did have sleep paralysis again, but later I did search and I found references to a folklore demon called Anna, and it was tied to suffocation dreams. I burned sage, marked my doorways with salt, and I wore my St. Benedict medal every night. After breaking free from that toxic relationship, I threw out everything that carried his energy and cleansed the house, and for a while the silence returned. But Linda resurfaced. A few months ago, while I worked in the garage, my daughter, supposedly asleep, cried out upstairs. She cried for me, asking, "Mom, where are you?" I bolted inside and her door was shut. She was fast asleep. Since then, the kitchen has been, well, lively. Clattering noises whenever I leave dirty dishes, as though Linda herself is nagging me to clean. We chose her name after tearing down wood paneling during a remodel, and behind it, written in fading red paint, "Hi, Linda." The house was built in 1969. The original owners lived across the street, but no Linda was ever connected to it. The mimicry, though, that's the worst part. Just last week, lying in bed, I heard a soft little mom and, well, a voice saying, "Mom." And it was drifting from my daughter's room, and she was asleep, and sometimes she even asked me why I was talking to her from the hallway when I hadn't spoken a word. For the past 2 weeks, both of us have been drained and exhausted and nauseous and restless. Last night I dug out a St. Christopher medallion my father once gave me. Almost immediately I felt lighter, maybe a placebo, maybe protection, and this isn't the first haunted place I've lived. My childhood home was thick with spirits. One boy who died in the house, his father who, well, ended his own life in the basement, and our dog never set paw downstairs. He would growl at the shadows, and I even used a Ouija board once, which only made the air heavier. Tisk, tisk. Since then, I've lived in apartments and other houses. Some peaceful, some kinda not, and this one is different. Something here feels old and waiting, like it chose me. Next week I'll see a medium, and until then I sage and I pray and I surround myself in imagined light. But the mimicry, the voice that isn't my daughter's, it keeps whispering. I can't shake the thought that Linda isn't Linda at all. The watcher beyond the glass. When I was a kid, I used to have this nightmare that wasn't really a nightmare. It was more like a series, like some messed up TV show that kept rolling out new episodes whether I wanted them or not. And every time I sort of slipped into it, I knew exactly where I was and exactly what was about to happen. I called him the Watcher Beyond the Glass. Clunky name, I know, and it's kind of what stuck with me. The setting was always my real childhood bedroom. Every detail was perfect. Posters on the wall, the creaky dresser, the scratch on the door. The old gum that I stuck underneath something I probably should not have stuck it under. Except there was one thing. The wall at the foot of my bed wasn't a wall anymore, it was glass. One massive pane, ceiling to floor, looking straight out into the front yard. My room was ground level, so I had a perfect view of the crooked sidewalk and the yard's patchy grass and the dim orange glow of the street lamp at the corner. The second I realized I was back there, the dread hit me like a weight on my chest. I'd tried to shut my eyes and will myself awake, but it never seemed to work. I was always forced to stare through the glass, waiting for the inevitable. And then, like clockwork, he appeared. The figure would drift up the sidewalk, cut across the lawn, and just stop right in front of the window. Always smiling, always the same rotten grin. And he looked wrong, like too tall, skin like candle wax, bald head gleaming under the street lamp. Never moved his lips, but his voice would slide into my head as clear as he was whispering into my ear. And he told me he could see me anywhere. That distance, walls and time, well, none of it seemed to matter to him. He was always there watching. He loved reminding me that my parents couldn't see him. Wouldn't believe me even if they could. Gave him this twisted glee, like he and I shared a secret pact I had no choice in. But there was one night, still makes me shiver when I think about it. He stood at the glass and his grin was wider than usual. Began talking about the other kids he visits, describing them in detail. The way you'd talk about friends you saw yesterday. And then when I finally snapped and shouted my dream that I'd scream, that my parents would hear, he leaned closer and said, "Your parents are leaving soon. I know where they'll be staying. I know the room number. And I know you'll be left all alone." He named the hotel and the city and the exact date. Don't remember how the dream ended, only the terror of it. And I'm certain about this, that he was not lying. That he wasn't just a dream. I carried that fear with me for years, and even now, part of me still wonders if he was really visiting. The smiling silence. A couple of weeks back, not going back and forth with my partner, make it short. I decided to share something that rattled me more than I'd like to admit. Near where I work, there's a patch of forest that hides a cluster of old houses. Not your typical boarded-up city houses, but homes that were simply abandoned in the woods. And from what I've learned, they all belonged to a single family who, for reasons nobody knows, just left. They didn't sell the land, they didn't take their belongings. Nothing. Whole bedrooms, garages, and closets frozen in time. And for nearly 3 decades, they've just been sitting there rotting away. Well, local kids, of course. They know all about these places. They've been vandalized and trashed and covered in spray paint and beer cans. Typical behavior. I'd been inside with coworkers before and never found anything like paranormal, just broken furniture and the occasional raccoon nest. But a few weeks ago on a bright Saturday, I decided to walk there alone, and in hindsight, I think that was mistake number 1. When I arrived, the forest was alive. Birds were darting overhead and squirrels cracking branches. Even the faint snort of a deer not far off. I headed for the largest house, the one I've always assumed belonged to the grandparents, judging by the outdated furniture and old coats and all that stuff hanging in the hall closet. I slipped into the garage, careful to avoid the sagging hole in the roof, and last time I was there, I'd seen raccoon scat scattered below it. Inside, the hallway stretched ahead, familiar to me from the past visits. But as I passed a small bedroom, something new caught my eye. A red smiley face sprayed across the wall. Not cheerful, but kind of twisted and wrong, the kind of grin that makes your stomach tighten. Probably the work of teenagers, but it stuck with me. I carried on to the kitchen, the heart of the house, you could say. From there, I could head to the living room, to the basement, or up the creaking stairs, and I paused, deciding which path to take. Then it hit me like an oppressive wave of dread. Not fear like when you watch a horror movie. No. This was primal and raw. Every hair in my body stood up. Felt like something massive was looming behind me and breathing down my neck, ready to pounce. I froze, not a sound, nothing moved, but my instincts screamed to leave. I retraced my steps slowly out of the hallway and through the garage and onto the lawn. I turned back, expecting to see someone or something in the kitchen. Instead, I realized the forest had gone silent. There was no birds and no insects and no wind, just stillness. And then came the strangest sensation. Not that something was behind me, but that something was inside of the house, and it was watching me, and it was quiet and patient and focused. That was enough. I left fast. And even as I walked the overgrown path back to the road, the silence clung to me. For 100 yards I felt pursued, but footsteps. At last, and I was almost half a mile away, the woods came alive again. The buzzing of insects and the chatter of birds. Life returning, as if nothing had happened. I called my partner as soon as I reached the truck, whispering the whole story. She told me never to set foot in those houses again, and I didn't argue. I've never felt anything like that before. Didn't see a figure, didn't hear a voice, but what I felt was deliberate and malicious, and something letting me know that it was there. And worst of all, I can't stop picturing that smile on the bedroom wall. Its grin still follows me when I close my eyes. So that's it. That's my story. Take with it what you will. And by the way, stay safe out there. The crying in the walls. So picture this. I'm 30 and I'm living in the basement room of my house, and sometime around mid-May I start hearing crying. Not just muffled sniffling next door crying. This sounded like it was inside the walls. Naturally, I assumed it was a neighbor at first. People cry and life happens. But then weeks passed, and the sound kept returning, always from the same spot, always at night. That's when the thought hit me. Who goes down into their basement every night for over a month just to sob? There's definitely people that do that. But around that time, I also had to process some pretty painful news. A cousin of mine passed years ago in July of 2016. She had a really tragic life, and when she died, I ended up with a few of her belongings. Old jewelry and journals and little pieces of her, you could say. I don't talk about it much, but it sits heavy with me. So when the crying didn't stop, I started wondering if maybe somehow it could be her. I know it sounds wild, but I've read that spirits who die in trauma sometimes linger, working through grief they couldn't resolve during life. The weeping gets described as a kind of loop, like they're stuck processing. Some folks, they suggest creating a memorial space, laying out their belongings and telling their story out loud. It's meant to help them move on, and part of me feels desperate to try in case this is really her. But then came the spirit box. My first time using one, in fact. A PSB-7. I wanted to dismiss it as a dumb toy, but God, I wanted to dismiss it. But the responses rattled me. Amid the static, a woman's voice asked if I could hear her, and she screamed, "Help me." And at another point, 4 and the word 9 came through clear as day. Then harsher voices, men, I think, spitting venom like, "Get out and you'll regret it." I replayed the audio on my computer. It hit even harder. I hadn't noticed how distinct the words were in the moment. The next night I tried again, and half the session was just help on repeat. And once an old man's voice barked, "Leave." I emailed a local paranormal society, but no word back yet. Thought about calling a medium, even though that's way outside my comfort zone. I am spiritual, but not religious, and, well, ghosts, that's always been my number one nightmare. And now here I am, basement walls echoing with sobs and a spirit box begging me to listen. And me not knowing if the right move is to reach out or to run. Well, you know what I think. The tenant's shadow. When I moved into my new loft, the landlord casually mentioned that the previous tenant had been, quote, end quote, troubled. Apparently an addict who'd left the place in ruins. My partner and I laughed it off at first, patched up when we could, and we made it our little refuge. But 2 months in, the laughter had worn thin, and something was wrong here. It started during a shared slump. Both of us sank into heavy moods, and I couldn't sleep without nightmares. And almost every nap ended in sleep paralysis. One afternoon, I woke up to see a twisted version of my partner looming over me, grinning too wide. And the worst part was, she was at her office across town. Later that day, the apartment felt hollow. The kind of silence that hums in your chest while cleaning. Well, my partner stepped out to throw away a bag of trash. She left the main door open but latched the screen door, and a minute later I turned around. The main door was shut and the screen door swung wide. That latch does not move on its own. We panicked and we burned sage and chanted affirmations. We did this for about a week and everything was quiet. No paralysis, no nightmares, no sense of being watched. But then we hosted a get-together, friends and drinks and beer bottles scattered around, and nothing unusual. Till the next morning. The first time I used the bathroom was normal. An hour later I walked back in, the walls were crawling with flies. Dozens of them. I swatted them all down and I cleaned and sanitized, but they returned in waves. There's no cracks, no food, nothing rotting. They simply appeared. Gotta check that drain. Both of us felt it. Something was brushing past our backs like a tug on her shirt while she washed her hands. A cold breath on me at the sink. We cleansed again, scrubbing the mess and blessing the rooms, and just like that the flies were gone. So was the tapping and the breath and the presence. We pieced together our theory. Whatever lingers here feeds on chaos, on bottles and filth and disarray. And the night we let the apartment slip into disorder, it grew stronger, and once we restored order, it lost its grip. Some call the Lord of Flies Beelzebub. Well, my partner thinks it's something smaller and sadder. A thought form, maybe left behind by the tenant, fattened by every moment of neglect. Either way, the shadow in this loft doesn't belong to us, and we plan to keep it that way. The heavy house across the street. This morning started like any other morning. I'm sipping coffee on my back porch, watching my dogs wrestle over a squeaky toy. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. They heard it too, and they went ballistic, which meant I had no choice but to investigate. Front door empty and side door empty. Weird third door we inherited from the previous owner is also empty. At that point, I figured it was either a ghost or maybe Amazon playing mind games with me again. But then across the street, I noticed a handwritten sign. Estate sale. Somebody stepped out of a car with that "I'm about to dig through a stranger's life" look. I thought, why not? You can find treasures in old houses. Plus, it beat folding laundry. The second I stepped inside, though, it hit me. This wave of sadness. So thick it was almost physical. And I've been to plenty of estate sales before, and usually my only emotion is, should I really spend $5 on this broken lamp? But this was different. I wandered through the rooms. My chest was heavy, like I was carrying somebody else's grief. The pull brought me back again and again to a bookshelf crammed with dusty novels and vinyl records. I spotted something. A Fable by William Faulkner, and I'm a sucker for old books, so I grabbed it and a few others before it dissolved into kind of tears in front of the cashier there, and I gulped air like I'd just escaped a haunted attic. My mom was still inside, and, well, she loves to inspect everything, including broken blunders. So I waited in the curb with my stack of books like some tragic character in a sad indie film. Later, I learned the truth. The couple who lived there, they weren't dead at all. They were alive. 94 and 97. Simply moved into an assisted living facility, which was somehow comforting and unsettling at the same time. Still, the house didn't feel empty, and when I went back, the heaviness seemed to cling to me, especially near a room I'd avoided the first time. My mom insisted I step inside, and the moment I did, it hit harder than before. Migraine, tears, the whole package. I left quickly. Therapy appointment. Lucky timing. Now the book sits in my office, humming with quiet weight. Can't shake that feeling that the house is holding on to something. Not death exactly, but memories so thick they've congealed into air. And maybe when I heard that doorbell this morning, it wasn't a ghost at all. Maybe it was the house calling me. The 3 knocks at the Ludlow house. About 18 months ago, I had to travel to Ludlow. It's in Shropshire. I was there for a short work assignment. The client put me in this charming old Victorian guest house. Nothing fancy, just one of those grade 2 listed places with slanted staircases and uneven floors. Checked in after work, it was no fuss. They gave me the top floor room. Not an attic exactly, but you could feel the roof sloping above your head. It was snug and even a bit quaint. Nothing spooky. I grabbed dinner at a pub nearby and came back, watched some TV, and eventually dozed off. I was totally relaxed. Then, at around 2:45 in the morning, I woke up all at once. Goosebumps straight away for no reason. The room was facing the back garden, so it was completely silent. No traffic, no voices, just stillness. And then it started like clear, deliberate footsteps across the carpet. They were slow and getting closer and louder. I froze and I didn't dare open my eyes. The steps stopped right by my bed. My heart was hammering. And then, this is the bit that makes my skin crawl even now, the wooden headboard creaked 3 sharp times, right behind my skull. I hadn't moved an inch, and I lay there for what felt like forever, maybe 10 minutes before I scrambled for the lamp and switched the TV back on. Needless to say, sleep wasn't happening after that. The next morning over breakfast, I cautiously mentioned it to the owner. She gave me this knowing look and said, You wouldn't be the first guest to hear things at night. And the funny thing is she added that most of the reports came from the ground floor room, never the one I'd been in. Can't explain it to this day. I was fully awake and clear-headed with no dreams and no half-sleep stuff. Just footsteps and those 3 knocks. The umbrella girl returns. When she was about 6, my niece had an imaginary friend, or at least that's what we thought. She called her the girl with the umbrella. Strange name for a strange companion. Sometimes she'd whisper that the girl was standing right behind us and watching. And creepier still, she'd repeat things that this quote-unquote friend told her. Things that disturbingly often turned out to be true. But when she turned 8, the girl with the umbrella simply vanished. My niece sketched her from memory. She did it again and again, and yet never ever would draw a face on this thing. Not because the girl had none, but because every time she tried, it made my sister, her mom, cry. So years pass. My niece and I are bonded over ghost stories and paranormal shows, and we'd laugh about how her dad, this towering stoic man, would practically curl up in terror at the mention of spirits. Then came her 12th birthday. She announced she wanted to start a ghost podcast, just her and me telling stories to the world. Her parents said absolutely not. Too young for the internet. But I made a deal. We'd record episodes just for us and never post them. And it became a ritual. She'd come over and have dinner with me and my partner, and the 3 of us would laugh and tell stories and record them. It was simple and joyful, and most importantly, it was ours. And then April came. A car accident. My niece, Lila, and her father gone in an instant. My sister's heart shattered, and my boyfriend and I took in our other 2 daughters, as Hannah and Rose. That was while my sister tried to survive her grief, and as for me, I broke quietly. I tried to stay strong in front of the girls, but every night ended the same. Tears in my partner's arms, mourning the loss of the girl who had been my little ghost hunting sidekick. Months later, Hannah and Rose began to whisper that Lila was still with us, that she trailed behind their mother or me, and it was sweet and comforting, but I didn't let myself believe it. Because Lila and I, we had a code, an old record player from my grandfather's attic. We'd promised, if one of us ever crossed over, we'd make it spin, and it never did, so I knew she wasn't there. Or so I told myself. Then last week, my boyfriend finished a drawing. He'd sketched me waiting at a bus stop. But above me stood a figure, the girl with the umbrella. And this time she had a face, and it was Lila's. My boyfriend confessed that years ago, Lila had sworn him to secrecy. She told him the girl with the umbrella looked exactly like her. Never wanted to scare me, so he kept the promise. But when Hannah and Rose described seeing their sister with the umbrella, couldn't ignore it anymore. He drew what they described, and they confirmed that it was her. Now I don't know what to believe. I've always been a believer in the strange and the unseen, but this has shaken me. If the girl with the umbrella was Lila all along, then she's not gone. She's still here. She's watching The Hostel at 2 a.m. I'm a medical student from India, and this happened back in my hostel days. And our hostel was a huge rectangular building with my room tucked away at the farthest wing. It was a long hall shared by the 4 of us, and just outside was a shared bathroom that echoed with every sound. Like all college kids with poor judgment, we had a habit of watching horror films until way past midnight. One evening, after a greasy dinner out, we dragged ourselves back late, and my bed was the first one near the entrance, and the others kind of stretched deeper into the room. Around 2:15, I woke up to a furious banging on the door. Half asleep, I checked my phone, hoping it was just a dream. The noise grew sharper and insistent, almost angry, and oddly, my 3 roommates slept through it. Terrified, I shook the girl next to me awake, and she heard it too. Wanted to open the door. I stopped her. I was reasoning that if it was truly urgent, somebody from another room would have called us. We waited, and the knocking eventually ceased. So the next morning, I asked the girls in the adjacent room if they'd heard anything. They looked at me blankly. There's no noise, no prank, nothing. 2 nights later, things got stronger. Blah, 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 tripping on my own tongue. Get in line, face. Okay, me. 2 nights later, things got stranger. One roommate rose in the dark. Her eyes were unfocused. I whispered her name, but she ignored me. She walked straight to the door and opened it and peered both ways down the corridor, then closed it gently, went back to bed. When I asked her about it the next morning, she said she had clearly heard someone knocking. That weekend, everybody kind of left for their hometowns, except for me and one other girl. We decided to sleep early. Around midnight, she stirred, turned toward me with a smile that was far too wide and far too eerie, and went back to sleep without a word. That was the breaking point. The very next morning, I went to a temple and brought back a framed picture of Lord Hanuman. We placed it by the door, and after that, the nights were silent. No knocking, no wandering, no strange smiles. That was the first and last truly unsettling brush with the unknown in my life. Hanuman, the window at Gaines Tavern. Summer of 2020, peak boredom season, and me and 3 buddies decided to hit up this supposedly haunted spot in our hometown. The Gaines Tavern, down in Walton, Kentucky. If the name rings a bell, it's because Ghost Hunters actually filmed an episode there. Season 14, Episode 6. I gave the whole trip a little bit of extra, are we actually dumb enough to do this flavor? Ghost peppery. By the time we rolled up, it was around 11. The place was pitch black except for 2 sickly yellow lights in the parking lot that made everything feel creepier instead of safer. Our whole plan was just to mess around, maybe film some orbs on camera because we're all those kids who love spooky nonsense. Never really expect anything to happen. We wandered for about half an hour, peeking in dusty windows with flashlights. Whispered joking about what we'd do if some Victorian ghost lady actually waved back. On our way out, I figured I'd take one last picture of the front, just in case. And for context, the tavern looks like a big old manor. 2 neat rows of windows, 5 across the top, 5 across the bottom. The front door dead center. Later, when I zoomed in on the far right bottom window, I nearly dropped my phone. You could clearly make out shapes and multiple figures, and one of them a bald man wearing what looked like suspenders and a stained undershirt. At first glance, it was just a weird white blur, but zoomed in, you could literally see his outline. Even what looked like a belt buckle, I swear it. Thinking it was maybe a trick of the light, I had my buddy stand exactly where I was. Same angle, same everything. Take the shot. He came out pitch black. Well, his came out pitch black. We tried a couple more and there was nothing. Only that one picture showed the figures, and that's when the this is funny mood flipped into nope, nope, nope. So we sprinted back to the car, and we finally caught our breath at my friend's house. My mom called, and it was around midnight. She told me my grandma had just passed, and she'd been fighting spinal cancer for months now, but the timing stacked against what happened earlier. It hit me like a truck. And the night didn't end there, though. Around 3 a.m., when most of us were crashing in my friend's basement, one of my buddies suddenly sat up, clicking his tongue like he was trying to get someone's attention. What is he, a lizard? He started mumbling about needing a new spine, saying his back was broken and just this rambling and half-coherent stuff. And we were talking to him at full volume, and he wouldn't respond, and out of nowhere he slumped back down and passed out again. Eek. And when I shook him awake a few minutes later and asked him what the hell that was about, he blinked and said he had no idea. He even repeated the same nonsense about his back once or twice before snapping out of it. Then swore up and down he didn't remember a thing. We never did figure it out, just chalked it up to another piece of dad lore for the night. But even now, whenever I scroll back to that photo, I can't unsee the man in that window. The swing that wouldn't stop. I was 11 when it happened. It's one of those summers where my family made the pilgrimage back to my mom's side of the family on the East Coast. I was used to traveling. I was used to airports and used to cars and you just name it. So when I heard we were leaving our calm little Virginia town for the noise and neon of Brooklyn, New York, I didn't think much of it. That is, until the 3-hour car ride loomed over me like a prison sentence. My mom grew up in Brooklyn. She hadn't been back in years, not since I was about 5. And this trip was her idea. Apparently, it was time to see Aunt Renee again. The air outside felt heavy and it felt wet, like stepping into a warm towel. I liked it though. Humidity was weirdly comforting, like the world was giving me a hug. But then the buzzing started. Mosquitoes, the eternal nemesis of every East Coast summer. I bolted into the car before they could claim me as their buffet. The ride itself was rough, and my cousin Kayla, who was 7, hummed herself and made random noises in the back seat. I knew she couldn't help it. She was on the spectrum, but my 11-year-old brain wasn't exactly patient. Her little sister Mia, 5 years old and endlessly repetitive, decided I was her favorite audience. Do you miss me? Do you miss me? Do you miss me? Till I finally said yes. And I've never really been good with little kids. I can't say no to their requests, no matter how ridiculous. After an hour, my phone died, and it was tragic. I tried to nap, and my mom and my aunt blasted music so loud the car practically shook, and I trained myself to sleep anywhere. Planes, trains, even through turbulence. So eventually, I drifted off. I woke up outside of a brick apartment building in Brooklyn, Aunt Rainey's place. Stumbled inside and collapsed on the couch without a word, and the next morning, I met my cousins again. Jalen, tall and confident at 12, and Marcus, younger at 9 but bursting with energy. Jalen towering over me by a good half a foot at that, which was kind of unfair since he was only a year older. That afternoon, somebody suggested we take the subway into the city. I'd never been on one before, and the chaos of it and the screeching brakes and packed cars and vendors shouting was overwhelming. We wandered Manhattan, eating pretzels and hot dogs from stands that smelled both amazing and slightly suspicious. Later that night, 10 o'clock, pitch black, we ended up at the playground near the apartment. I tried to argue against it since playgrounds at night are objectively creepier than haunted houses, but nobody seemed to listen to me. The place felt off, and quiet in a way that wasn't normal for a city block. We shrugged it off, climbed the monkey bars, started talking. That's when I noticed it. There's a little baby swing over there, and it's moving on its own. And it wasn't just a gentle sway, it was like swinging like a kid was still in it. The problem was the last mother and child had left like half an hour ago. Jalen, look. He squints. Well, that's weird. He hopped down and he approached the swing. The second he got it, slowed to a dead stop. Like it had been caught, and he reached out, touched the seat, and yanked his hand back like it burned. It's warm. Just like somebody's just been here. I climbed down, my heart thudding, and then Jalen froze again. He touched a bar in the jungle gym and said, "This one's warm too." But neither of us had been near it. We stood there, two kids with no good explanation, until we both came to the sudden unspoken conclusion. The park was not empty. We decided the place must have been haunted by kids and made sense in sort of a grim way. Playgrounds attract both joy and danger, and maybe something terrible had happened here, and their spirits just never left, playing forever, night after night. And when we finally left, I couldn't shake the feeling of a small invisible hand wrapping around mine. It was my first ghost encounter, and it taught me something chilling. Maybe the afterlife isn't pain or peace, it's boredom. Eternal, restless boredom. But hey, that's all behind me now, right? The Fog Man of Hollow Pines. So first off, I swear to you, we weren't trying to summon anything creepy. Ghost hunting wasn't the plan, and honestly, me and my friend, who we're just going to call Ivy for now, just wanted to do some witty nonsense for fun. We came prepared with crystals, incense, dried herbs, seashells, and even a random jar of cinnamon. We thought it might be magical. The idea was silly, but what happened was not. We started by sprinkling salt in a circle around us and laying down a blanket that doubled as our quote-unquote altar. On it, we placed our shiny little quartz collection and a couple of seashells to keep the good vibes. Ivy was hoping to get clarity on her situationship. She wouldn't call it a boyfriend. Situationship. Earlier at a cafe, we'd already done some DIY tarot readings with a homemade deck, and shockingly, they gave us answers that hit a little bit too close. Still, I thought it was all play pretend. Once the salt circle was set and the incense smoke curled in the air, we decided to go further. I suggested contacting the spirits of the forest. Since, well, it was already in the quote-unquote plan. We shuffled the deck, set it down at the altar. From the start, we said out loud, "No negative energies, only protection, only safety." I wasn't buying into it at all until the air shifted. It was like something massive just standing there watching. I turned to Ivy to ask if she felt it too. She said it first. "There's something behind me." Strange thing is, we both described it the same way. A towering, man-shaped figure, made of black fog, limbs stretched too long to be natural. And that detail still makes my stomach twist around. We asked the cards if it was real. Answer, yes. We asked if it was right behind Ivy. Yes. We asked if it had bad intentions. Absolutely. And at this point, the wind picked up like the forest itself was whispering at us. We tried to push the thing away with salt and rosemary. The cards told us it was definitely masculine, which matched the heavy, dark presence pressing in. Ivy reminded me of how earlier we'd been ranting about women's rights and toxic masculinity. Maybe this thing had been lurking since then. The idea gave me chills. We tried asking other spirits instead, but the vibe got kind of worse. The cards spoke in half threats, and it felt like the fog man was circling our salt barrier. That's when leaves behind Ivy rustled like something had stomped down hard. Except nothing was there. No rock, no squirrel, nothing, just movement. The forest, it didn't like us. That much was clear. When we asked straight up if we were welcome, the cards went from maybe to leave. Nice pun, Forrest. Did we listen? Of course not. We stuck around to take pictures like idiots. The sky went from bright to storm dark in minutes, and thunder started rolling in. The second we left the pines, the rain crashed down so violently our shoes filled with water. Hair plastered, clothes soaked. We stumbled out half laughing, half panicking. Ivy swore it was the forest punishing us. Thought maybe it was the opposite. Like the rain was cleansing us and scrubbing off whatever filth the fogman tried to cling to us. Either way, one thing's certain. I don't think either of us will step foot in that forest again. And you would be surprised at how much liquid high tops can actually keep in there. Just poured mine out, well, an hour ago. Don't ride motorcycles with an umbrella, by the way. The house that didn't sleep. Back in my sophomore year of college, I lived in a creaky old rental house just off campus. Nights were my favorite. Hours wasted on late-night poker games with roommates. Or perhaps binging shows until the sun peeked over the blinds. Since lectures weren't mandatory, I treated mornings like some cruel myth, like freedom was delicious, and responsibility was a dish I never ordered. At first, the place just felt quirky. You know, old house stuff, settling wood drafty windows, pipes that coughed in the night. But then, little things started nagging at me. I'd swear somebody was standing behind me while I typed, only to find the room empty. My dreams soured into brutal nightmares. I'd wake up in a sweat. My eyes would be wide. My body would be stiff as stone, pinned to the bed like some invisible thing had me. The sounds came next. Closet doors groaning open on their own. Shuffling in the hall when no one else was home. Lights sputtering out for no reason. Sometimes, just as I was about to drift off. And things got worse after a long weekend trip. One night, I'm half asleep when I heard a scraping sound like wood dragging against wood. My closet door slowly inching open. I staggered out of bed, more annoyed than scared, till I felt it. A sharp tug on the hood of my sweatshirt, pulling me backward. I spun around, fists up, but nothing, just silence. A few days later, house gave me its most chilling gift. Someone or something had carved into the bathroom wall, not paint, not marker, but a gouge in the plaster. It looked like a face. Not human. The angles were wrong, the eyes too deep, the jaw stretched like it wanted to bite. Tried sanding it down, I tried painting over it, and the outline would always come back and darker each time. Even stranger, every lamp in my room burned out within days. Fresh bulbs, brand new packs. They'd die out one after another. It felt less like faulty wiring and more like something didn't want me seeing in the dark. The final straw came when I woke at 3 a.m. I saw shapes crawling around the ceiling, shadows that weren't mine, writhing like they were alive. And that night I grabbed a blanket, crashed on the couch. A week later it moved out for good, and now the house looks normal. Students live there, laughing on the porch, music thumping through the walls, but no shadows, no carvings, no whisper of anything strange. But me, I still dream about that face in the wall. And when the lights flicker, I wonder if the house remembers me. The Watcher in the Road. Late autumn, 2023. I'm dispatched to a serious RTC during a night shift. I'll keep the details vague for the sake of privacy, but it was close to catastrophic. A delivery lorry, massive and unforgiving, it had plowed into a crowd of 8, driving them against the side of a shop before reversing, leaving a trail of broken bodies scattered in the tarmac. I arrived first on scene, greeted by chaos. The kind of scene you never truly prepare for. Torn limbs, blood pooling across the pavement, and air thick with panic. Triage has to be fast, seconds, not minutes. I zeroed in on a young man whose injuries were beyond grim. Catastrophic bleeding from both a leg and an arm, and one femur snapped clean and the other shattered through the skin. A punctured lung, a crushed chest wall that was quickly dragging him into cardiac arrest. And on top of that, an open fracture to the ankle and drifting consciousness. If I listed everything, we'd be here all night. I started treatment, doing what training and instinct demanded. But every few moments, my eyes were pulled almost against my will to the right. There something stood. It was black and hazy, almost translucent, like smoke shaped into the outline of a person of some kind. It didn't seem to move, it didn't sway, it just stood watching. I tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but the street was well lit. I could see my colleagues clearly just a few meters past it. The figure remained solid and separate. I looked away, forced myself back to my patient, but my gaze kept being dragged back. 5, 6 times at least, each time still there. Then the strangest part, his injuries seemed to multiply. One crisis solved, only to find another one flaring. It was as if something or someone was working against me, undoing every move. My mind, usually razor sharp under pressure, felt fogged, almost as if I was wading through a treacle. That figure didn't budge. Its stare burned into me. For context, this wasn't a night where I was running on fumes. I'd slept well. I'd eaten properly. I was not stressed, and if anything, I was in a good mood. It was my last night shift before a holiday. I'd seen worse in my career, far worse. I had no reason to break mentally here. So I've since tried to rationalize it. Bad lighting? No. Everything else was crystal clear. Eye floaters, impossible. Stayed fixed no matter where I looked. Imagination, well, doubtful. Not somebody who feeds their brain horror films or ghost stories. And stress, well, not likely, given my state of mind. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was there for him. That maybe it was his time and I'm standing in the way. Reaper or angel, I don't know. But if it was an angel, it wore the wrong clothes because its presence chilled me to the core. The part that still rattles me is despite all those injuries, nobody died that night. Not a single soul. Which is staggering given what we saw. I'm proud of what we did, of course, but that shadow, the Watcher, it haunts me. Still then, I've been on thousands of calls and I haven't seen it again. Maybe next time, if I do, I'll nod to it. The Woman by the Bamboo Road. Location: Assam, India. When I was working like a sort of government posting. It's near the Bhutan border. It's back in 2018. Office hours were easy. By 2 p.m. I'd usually be free, and since the village had unreliable electricity, a nightmare for somebody who's like me, who was gaming every night back then, I decided to stay in a nearby town, commute the 35 kilometers on my motorbike. The road itself was smooth and well-maintained, but for a good 20 kilometers it was nothing but stretches of bamboo forest and the occasional cow herd, and you get used to the emptiness, which is why when you spot someone, your eyes immediately lock on them. That day around 3 p.m., halfway home when I noticed her, a woman dressed in tribal attire, walking along the road. She looked about 30. I slowed slightly past her and instinctively glanced into my rearview mirror to catch her face. The mirror showed nothing. She was gone, and, well, now any sensible person would just keep riding, but nope. I stopped. Maybe part curiosity, maybe part arrogance. After all, broad daylight doesn't usually pair with hauntings, and got off the bike, scanned the bamboo thickets. There's no way she could have vanished so quickly. No houses, no trails, and stood there for a moment, shrugged it off, and relieved myself by the roadside. Rode home. That night was normal. Dinner, games, bed at 1 a.m. But around 3, woke up with that heavy, crushing dread that paralyzes you before you even know why. I couldn't move. Sleep paralysis, I thought. I'd had it before, and usually it's just shadows or weight on your chest. Standard drill. This time was different. Cold arms wrapped around me from behind. Ice seeped straight into my bones. Then a woman's voice. Gentle. Almost musical. You don't know me. What would you do with my name? My throat went dry. I whispered, "Leave me alone." She replied and said, "I won't. I'll stay with you forever." Why? Because you were looking for me. The next morning, I had a raging fever. Couldn't drag myself to work. That night it happened again. The embrace and the voice, and this time she asked, "Do you not like me?" I stayed silent. She went on. "My husband didn't want me either. He hanged me in the village. Go ask there. I'll never leave you now." By then, I was unraveling. The following day, I told my office attendant, we're going to call him Ram. We rode together to the small tea shop in that village. When Ram mentioned the woman casually to that shopkeeper, the man nodded gravely. "Yes," he said, "the woodcutter's wife had died recently, hanging from the rafters of her own house. People whispered that the husband killed her because she couldn't conceive after years of marriage." Ugh. That was enough for me. Ram took me to a local tantric who listened to my story and shook his head. "You were lucky to survive 2 nights, he said. "Those who die in violence don't rest, they cling. And you stopped for her." He performed a ritual and gave me a packet of ashes and told me to scatter them by my door and bed for 7 nights. His fee was 20 rupees. That was the last time she visited me. Now, maybe it was just sleep paralysis, maybe some sort of fever-induced hallucination, but here's the thing. I've had it before. Never once did it speak to me. When I first saw her on the road, where she could have gone, I don't know. Since then, I've stopped dismissing these stories as superstitions. Some things, they don't want to be explained. They only want to be found. Yeah, I feel that. The ceiling guest. It started quietly. the sandwich missing from the fridge, a lamp switched on in the morning. Though I always left it off at night. I do live alone in a one-bedroom apartment, so I chalked it up to stress, or maybe my just junky bad memory. Then came the night I woke to footsteps. Not outside, not in the hallway, inside. Slow and measured, as if somebody knew the floor plan better than I did. I grabbed a kitchen knife, searched every corner. Nothing. The door was still deadbolted, actually. But a week later, I noticed the attic hatch above the closet had shifted, just barely open. I set my old laptop to record while I left for work. Its camera angled at the living room, and hours and nothing scrolled by until the very end. A pale foot swung down first, then a figure, thin, almost skeletal, hair hanging over its face. It crouched and reached for a carton of milk and crawled back into the darkness like it had done this for months. The police came. They searched the crawl space, and what they found was a thin blanket, half-eaten food, a rusted spoon, and notebooks filled with my name written over and over again. Somebody hadn't just been living above me. They had been studying me. The Spectre of Willow Bend Road. I'm driving down Willow Bend Road. It's not far past the old Ridgeview golf course. The clock on my dashboard read somewhere between 5:15 in the morning. I was heading to work on Ocala, and if I had to guess, it was early autumn. Air wasn't sharp with winter cold, but really wasn't quite soft with summer warmth either. Just that crisp in-between kind of air. The road wasn't really cloaked in fog, though I do remember seeing a pale mist hanging low in the distance. It's almost like it was waiting. That's when I noticed it. Something gliding across the road, pale and shapeless at first, like a sort of figure smudged into the air itself. Willow Bend doesn't twist or climb much. It runs mostly straight with only a few lazy bends. I was on one of those straight stretches when the thing appeared and drifted out from the left where the woods are thick with pines, crossed toward the right where the trees sort of break open into farmland, rolling off into low hills and broken fences. At first, I thought it was a patch of fog curling across the asphalt, but as it got closer, it sharpened into something else, something with motion and presence and form. It wasn't just a mist anymore. It was a figure and a spirit and a specter. I slowed the car, and my pulse was just knocking in my throat while I was doing it. I had that exact thought. What the hell am I looking at? Well, I didn't dare glance to the passenger side. I had this gnawing certainty that if I turned my head, it would already be there, pressed to the glass, staring back at me. So instead, I floored it. The stop sign came up faster than I expected. I didn't even pause. I blew straight through that thing, yanked the wheel into a hard right, and tore down the next road. And can't say how long it was before I looked into the rear view. Probably at least some amount of miles. But I will tell you this. Still don't like driving down that road in the dark. Well, yeah, the apartment that didn't want us. In April, my husband and I packed up our camping rental and we moved into our very first house. Timing couldn't have been better. We're expecting our first baby, and our old place had grown far too small and far too noisy. And if I'm being honest, far too haunted. Because what follows is a record of the strange events that unfolded during our year and a half in that apartment. The first oddity was subtle. I came home one evening and felt an undeniable sense that someone was waiting inside. Called out my husband's name near the guest room where he keeps his clothes. The bedroom door slowly swung open. It was as if it was a reply. But the room was empty. The whole apartment was empty. Not long after, we're hanging an old wooden mask that my husband bought during college. I joked and asked the mask's permission to hang it. He stepped out of the room and I sort of muttered to myself, this is the kind of thing that gets people cursed. And right then, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the wall, perfectly spaced like the kind you only hear in horror movies. It wasn't your door and it wasn't the neighbors. So one night my husband startled awake in the corner of our bedroom. There was a sort of tall figure with a hat brimmed low and eyes glowing a sort of sickly orange. The figure didn't move, it stared at us. And my husband insists now that it was a dream, but that same week he came home with sage and a lighter. I'll let you decide how much of a dream it was. My own encounter was less subtle. One dawn, my foot dangled from beneath the blanket, and I thought, better pull it in before something touches it. Too late. I felt a deliberate poke in the arch of my foot. I yanked it back under the covers and lifted my eye mask just enough to see a glowing greenish torso. It was stood at the far side of the bed. Its upper half was blocked by my mask. I thought, nope, I don't need to see the rest. Shut my eyes tight. The blanket tugged upwards a few times as though someone or something was trying to crawl in, and next night blanket lifted again, and after that silence. Another day while chopping onions, one of her knives leapt from the block, clattering across the tile. The block is angled downward. It should have been impossible without somebody pulling it free. We used it for years without a single mishap. The most unnerving moment came when I was pregnant. Carried a plate of crackers into the bathroom. I was bouncing them on a tub rim while I rushed to pee. Out of nowhere, the tub drain growled like a low guttural sound, like something alive struggling to breathe. It didn't stop until I fled, and the drain was silent forever after. And a few details worth noting. The final instance happened only after I became pregnant. And our apartment building, built in 1933, was run down and cheap and noisy and full of turnover and evictions and odd smells. Never feared the neighbors, but I never felt at ease either. Now, in our 1901 house just down the street, the unease is lifted completely. I can walk through the dark halls at night without worry, and sometimes that was unthinkable in the apartment. If you ask me, too many souls passed through that old place, and not all of them willingly. Hopefully they'll keep their grudges there with the landlord who deserves them. Let us raise our child in peace. Now I want onions. Cooked raw, I don't care. I just want some onions. The shadow on the stairs. I swear my house is haunted, which is kind of ridiculous. It was built barely 15 years ago by a sweet old couple who sold it to us. It has no tragic history, no record of gruesome murders, no abandoned cemeteries beneath the foundation. And yet every night, the walls whisper. See, I live in a region where people have existed, since forever. Different languages, different burial customs, and different gods. The land here has been conquered and imposed upon and reshaped, and well, Italian itself was forced on us under the fascist regime. Then came the Americans with their bases and drills and their explosions booming from the seafloor, and sometimes I wake to those detonations rattling the windows, like the ghosts themselves are knocking to be let in. But let me start with one of my mom's stories. One night she's home alone. Dad was away, and my brother had some kind of a sleepover, and I was out making questionable choices at a party. She was drifting off when she heard voices. 2 men, low and calm, climbing the stairs. She thought for a moment it was my dad, but then she remembered that she was alone. Footsteps came closer. The voices stopped. Then 2 heads. They slowly peeked from the bedroom door, watching her. Now, my mom doesn't scare easily, but well, she's human, so she grabbed for the knife that she keeps under the mattress. But when she looked back, nothing. Empty hallway, locked windows, bolted doors. And this was only the beginning. Another night, I'm watching a film on my dad's laptop. I'm sitting at the desk in pitch blackness. Behind me, the bed, to my left, the door. Downstairs, I could hear my family laughing in the kitchen. At some point, the stairwell light clicked on, and I heard my brother's footsteps climbing. I waited for him to walk in. I was ready to ask if he wanted to join. He stepped into the doorway, and it was silent, just staring. Then, without a word, he walked past me toward the bed. I followed him with my eyes, turning my neck as far as I could, and finally I spun the other way to get a better look. There was no one. Utterly confused, I sat frozen until footsteps echoed again, this time faster. My real brother appeared, haloed by the bright white light above him. And that's when I realized the first figure hadn't had a face, just a silhouette. A shadow soaked in strange greenish light, like those cursed back rooms videos. It isn't just me, because when my brother was little, he used to ask about the quote-unquote soldiers. Two blonde men, tall, dressed in white t-shirts and green cargo pants, marching up and down the stairs. He said they sometimes followed my mom to the kitchen. Soldiers of what exactly, I have no idea, and, well, those stairs. God, those stairs. Even as a kid, I'd lie awake staring at them, convinced something would crawl out there. And the acoustics, they don't make sense either. You can hear everything shouted downstairs from upstairs, but scream from the top of your lungs upstairs and there's nothing. Except once, when I sliced my hand open on a tape dispenser. They heard that perfectly fine. Friends have witnessed things too, actually. My best friend swore I whispered, "Don't be afraid," into her ear the moment I left the room. She turned, expecting me. The room was empty. And once we hosted an exchange student, a shy girl. She was pale and she never slept. At first she blamed homesickness, but eventually she cracked and she told me, "Every night there's a man in the doorway. When the light goes out, he stands there. If I close the door, he's still there." She thought it was my dad, I guess, but it couldn't have been. That man worships his sleep like it's a religion, and besides, scaring young girls at night is very not in his character. So I sleep into her room until she left, and during those nights, figure didn't return. Afterward, she never spoke to me again. Maybe she believed me, maybe she thought I was covering for a monster in the house. I guess I'll never know. But the stairs remain, and sometimes when the bombs boom deep under the sea, I wonder if the echoes carry something else with them. Something older than us. Something waiting in those shadows. The visitors in the doorway. They're pale and thin and faintly blue. No bruises, no pressure marks. Scratches. I've found them on my shoulders, across my ribs, and even one on my neck once. I don't have nails. I've bitten them down for years. Nervous habit. Nothing left to leave marks like this. I do have a dog, but his scratches are shallow and wild little zigzags when he jumps on me. These are deliberate. Long strokes like something dragging a single sharp finger. And if it were him, I'd notice. I'm not that oblivious. So I'm stuck. I'm in this strange loop of wondering who or what is touching me while I sleep. And I should also mention, for about a decade I had recurring shadow figure dreams. 4 times in total. I haven't had one in years, but the scratches, weekly almost. The dreams always start the same. I'm lying in bed staring at my bedroom doorway. Frozen but awake, and there's something there, a silhouetted, tall, featureless, darker than dark rounded one. They never enter. The moment I truly see them, they seem to vanish. Except once, after my son was born, I saw the figure at my door, and from my bed I could see into his nursery. Shadow slid across the hall, pulled his door shut, and left. And when I woke for real, the door was still closed. Very first dream came when I was pregnant, though. I woke to a shadow in my doorway. It turned not into my room, but down the hall toward the front of the house, disappearing near the door, like it had business elsewhere. And so here I am years later, still scratching my head. No pun intended. No shadow people anymore, but the scratches keep coming. The question lingers like a hum in the walls. More importantly, why are they still here? The night the house shook. This happened when I was maybe 11, maybe 12. Still a kid, but old enough to know when something feels wrong. It was late, around 2 a.m. I was in my room at the front corner of my dad's house, back when all of us siblings' parents still lived under one roof. Good times. We're in one of those quiet suburbs full of families and retirees, the type of place where nothing ever happens after dark, let alone on a school night. I was half watching YouTube before drifting off when I had one of those weird moments where you fall asleep for like 2 minutes and then suddenly snap awake. Except this time, what yanked me back wasn't a normal dream, it was this noise. A heavy, pulsing, droning sound, like a giant subwoofer pressed against my skull. It shook me awake, except when I opened my eyes, it didn't stop, it got louder. I remember covering my ears. It was unbearable, like the whole house was vibrating. For a second, I thought it was an earthquake. But the rhythm was too precise, like a mechanical heartbeat. And then, just as suddenly, it cut off with silence. Right after that, I swear I heard something like a remote-controlled car buzzing away down the street. That's when the front door creaked open. I didn't hear it shut, which freaked me out because that meant someone left with the intent of coming back. A few minutes later, I heard shuffling, those unmistakable, dry, dragging footsteps my dad makes when he walks barefoot. He'd gone to check. So I got out of bed and seeing if he noticed anything. He said he'd felt the same thing, the noise and the shaking, which is insane because he's partially deaf. Yet even if he heard it, none of my brothers woke up, not even the ones in the basement right under us. Just me and my dad. We stood there in the hallway, maybe about a minute, staring at each other, both thinking, what the hell was that? He brushed it off, saying maybe one of my brother's friends was messing around outside, but honestly, no way. The house had this weird 5-foot section of siding and brick, and banging on it wouldn't come close to shaking the place like that. Nothing like it ever happened before or since. I never brought it up to him again. He never mentioned it either. But I'll tell you this. Words don't do justice to how loud it was. It felt like standing next to a rocket taking off, only somehow inside of your house. Sweet dreams.
Curiosity leads us down the path less traveled. Paranormal M is where you'll find a community of fellow truth seekers, sharing and exploring real supernatural stories. Don't miss out on the adventure. Subscribe and turn on notifications today. Story number 1, Hat Man. I'd never heard of the Hat Man until I was describing to my oldest son this weird feeling I had of being watched. My home was built in 1984. I do know the previous owner's first husband died. Not sure if it was in the house. We're on 5 acres of woods. The house sits in the center of the property, and there's a 100-year-old cemetery that butts up to our backyard. 6 graves. We bought the place in 2017. I've always been sensitive, and I hear, smell, and sometimes see things. and many times how I pick up on spirits is feeling them and then seeing them in my mind's eye. A while back, I kept feeling that I was being watched, and what I saw in my mind's eye was a tall man wearing an old-fashioned hat. Think a hat worn by plague doctors. I mentioned to my son, and he got very concerned about the hat man. He advised me to not dwell on it. I don't know. He just couldn't articulate a reason, just a feeling. Within 6 months, our 9-year-old Rottweiler developed osteosarcoma. It was a very fast-growing cancer, and we had to have him put down. Rotties are very engaging with their people, and it broke our hearts. Since we have so much property, we found a pretty place and buried him there. I haven't felt Hat Man since. Spirit world ramping up. I come from a family who's always had paranormal experiences. My great-grandma, my grandma, and my dad have seen, heard, and smelled phantom things. And to us, it was a part of life. All but me, of course, have passed on. I have lots of stories and experiences that are strange or otherworldly, and I'm going to post them. This is the most recent. It happened over the weekend and last night and early this morning. I currently live in the South on 5 acres, and my backyard ends where a 100-year-old abandoned cemetery is. We also have a cleared area, surrounded by beautiful loblolly pines, live oak, and hog plums, where we buried one of our dogs, and have planted a cedar tree, where we put my late mother-in-law's ashes. Husband and I also wanted to be cremated when we die, and a tree planted over our ashes as well. I don't know if the proximity is what sort of makes my experiences ramp up. Last weekend I was at the beach. I had started reading a book when I felt the distinct presence of someone standing directly behind me. Way in my personal space. I looked around and nothing. Went back to reading, and it happened again. I could almost see the shadow in my mind's eye because no shadow was cast. It kind of rattled me because it was so in my space, and I actually called my husband to make sure that he was okay. I gave up on reading and went for a swim. It didn't happen again after that. Last night I was sitting in a chair reading the news on my phone, and a gray mist passed in front of me. I was startled because, while I occasionally don't feel alone, I've never seen anything. It disappeared as soon as we passed in front of me. This morning I woke up and I was laying in bed and I heard someone say hello. It was a woman's voice and came from the direction of the bedroom door. This happened at about 7 a.m. Swooshing noise. I'm quite experienced with hypnagogia, but I couldn't tell if it was this or was it something else. The fact it happened on Halloween is even weirder. I wasn't experiencing any of the other hypnagogia stuff. Last night between 3 and 4 a.m. I was lying on my back and I decided to lay on my side. After a few minutes of this, I heard a series of what I can only explain as irregular downdrafts of air. You know how an airplane makes a deep roaring noise as it goes overhead due to the action of wings forcing air down? It was like that, but like a slowly rotating helicopter blade or someone waving a sword above my bed. And all I was thinking was, what the hell is that? Please stop it. It stopped after a few times, and I looked around, but I couldn't find anything. I decided to lay on my back instead. Now I'm wondering what on earth this was. It seemed too real for hypnagogia. I can only think it was something with my ears. I did lose a radio underneath my bed earlier that night, but it was off, and not one that's easy to switch on, and the noise came from above. Strange and annoying low-frequency, rough rumbling noise in the middle of the night. Last night around 3 a.m., I noticed a very low background rumbling noise. It sounded like it was coming from the floor or the wall and wasn't uniform like a typical hum. It was very rough, like something vibrating or an engine rough idling. I can compare it to a classic car, a motor with a bad bearing or aircraft noise. It exhibited random pops and was almost like something moving. I was able to block the sound out by covering my ears. This noise actually caused me to lose 2 to 3 hours of sleep. I asked my parents, and they said they didn't hear anything. I can confirm that it wasn't a heating pump. That's way too uniform. The noise sounded lower than the typical 50 hertz hum, like 25 to 40 hertz. Around 5 or 6 a.m., it suddenly buzzed loudly and stopped. I do suffer from hypnagogia, but I could confirm that there and then that this noise was real, completely random and seemed to be from nowhere. At one point, it seemed to also make a hiss. This is really freaking me out because for the last few weeks I've been hearing strange noises near that wall like tapping. I've always assumed it was wind, and the flash of light I saw a few weeks ago, and a few days ago I was playing with a toy gun, and found if I held it a certain way, it would start bobbing up and down on its own. I will appreciate any attempt at explanation. No, I don't have one. Well, I remember it was 4 years ago at night. It all started with watching the Ghost app on YouTube for fun, then watching them sponsoring the Ghost app that communicates with the paranormal. In a text message and highlights the shape, here I thought it's fake, because they were using it for an advertisement so that they can, make money off of that. So I did download the app that they recommended, installed them, points my phone around my room, then suddenly it's showing there is a ghost in my closet. The app was supposed to highlight the shape. However, the text only appeared as hi, as like it's trying to speak. I ignored it because I thought that app is fake, that living off the money, so I uninstalled it and then went to sleep. A few moments later, I felt like someone was watching me and my body getting colder under the blanket. I didn't open my eyes, but I felt that someone was near. My mind spoke to me like a person next, but I'm deaf. It was telling me to not put my feet out of the blanket as my feet urged me to get out. My feet stretched out of the blanket, then someone grabbed my feet, then dragged me out of my bed. That happened so quickly, so I grabbed something around me. The only thing that I could grab was a Chinese chopstick so I can stab someone that grabbed me. But I looked up, and there was nobody in the room except me. I reckon it tried to grab me toward the closet. After everything happened, I just realized that they don't need to cast a spell on everything like Ouija boards. When we call anything that relates to ghosts, it's like we can summon them through the item. I admitted this did freak me out. If anyone asks me to play with the occult, then I would decline politely, because those things can be ending up horrific like Ouija boards. I'm done with the occult and vow that I'll never go back, ever. Okay, I'm not a cop, but I had to share this experience that turned me into a believer. A A couple of months later, a friend was dining out explaining my story when a stranger at the next table turned around and stated that something similar had happened to him at the exact same place. This place, the Lyman School for Boys, Westboro, Massachusetts Mental Hospital, whatever you want to call it, is known to be severely haunted. But I didn't believe that crap, no way. So I go there to have a couple drinks with a friend. We get into an argument. He leaves. Buzzed me, decided to light a fire about a quarter mile from the crematorium, alone, at 2 a.m. I grab some sticks and leaves and start walking down a small access road with a pump house that's at a reservoir. This is where it begins. All of a sudden, I notice this strange white outline, first indistinguishable right under a light. I assumed it was Flint and moved back and forth across the road trying to see. As I get closer, it looks like a woman in white with white hair flipped forward over her face. My heart skips a beat, but as I move closer, it vanishes into thin air as I'm staring at it. Not blinking at all. I try to ignore it, but I'm shaken. About 15 feet after the boathouse, there's a narrow path that leads to the clearing. As I hit this, the temperature drops noticeably. I had recalled a friend bringing this up at the same point a year earlier during daytime and moved on. But even more so on edge, hairs on my neck standing up, mind screaming. As I get 2/3 down, I hear this piercing shriek and a squirrel bolts directly less than a foot in front of me, and I jump back in terror. This was so generic scary movie pre-scare that I'd actually tried to use it as a so fake there's no way there's a real spirit here, in quotes. But at this point, I was terrified but wouldn't turn around, as it would require me admitting that there were spirits. I get to the water and stand there, feeling a presence. I look to the path I walked in on, and it completely fogged up in a matter of less than 30 seconds. At this point, I'm ready to get out of here, but standing in disbelief looking at the water for a moment. At which point, I hear this dry, piercing whisper coming from all around me. All it said was, "Out." I took that to mean, "Get out." Immediately dropped my fire-making supplies and sped walk out. Then all of a sudden, I heard footsteps following me. I stopped. They stopped. I continued. They continued. I ran. Haven't been back to that place since. And anytime my friends ask me to go there, I tell them, "Whoop, no." After this had happened, a friend recalled a time that they were skinny dipping at the same clearing. And a girl that we were with went completely limp in the water, eyes rolled back. I dragged her to shore. Her and I were the last ones out there, and she was deepest. I checked her pulse. She was fine. She was just staring at the sky with a blank expression, all of us nude as fuck. When she came back, she had zero recollection. She chalked it up to her being an attention whore, but after my experience, I have a hard time thinking something else was at play. When I first bought my old house, I had to have extremely annoying housemates to help pay the bills. One night, me and a housemate number 1 were sitting on opposite sides of the lounge room watching the TV when I heard the unmistakable sound of knuckles on glass. Knock, 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 in short succession. The sound seemed to come from the window behind the TV. Housemate number 1 and I looked at each other. "Someone is knocking on the window," he said, looking at the window behind the TV. "Must be number 2 housemate," I said. We continued watching the TV. Next commercial break, I got a torch to investigate. I tried to walk down the side of the house, but it was a solid mesh of spider webs because nobody ever went there. Like solid. You couldn't even chuck a tennis ball through without hitting one. I got a stick and cleared my way through the window. Then I shone the torch down the opposite end. It too was a solid mesh of spider webs. There was no way anyone could have walked through there. But me and number one housemate both heard the sound and both agreed it was coming from a window that was between the two of us. The other rooms had windows too, but we both agreed it was coming from the window closest to us. If it was the other room, it would have been closer to one of us, and the sound would have appeared to come from another room, not the room that we were in. The sound did not come from the TV. It was an old rank arena TV that didn't make any sound, that could be mistaken for reality, and the knocking did not fit into the context of the show that we were watching. There was a bush next to the window, but it's a bushy bush, and there were no branches or wind to push it against the window. The next door neighbor couldn't have reached the window as the fence is over 3 meters away, and the neighbor was an old man who was not into practical jokes. It wasn't the sound of a bird. We both agreed that it was the distinctive sound of knuckles knocking. Besides, a bird hitting a window makes a single thump noise. It's been 10 years since I bought the 1920s house. I haven't heard the sound before or since. Nothing else unexplainable has happened. Mine's potentially lame compared to other stories, but it applies. My wife is a believer and claims to often see ghosts. Her whole family do. There's been the occasional thing happen that I couldn't explain away. I eventually asked her to stop telling me if she saw things because it freaked me out a little bit. On a European holiday, we stayed at an agritourism type place in the middle of nowhere, half of an hour away from the town that we were supposedly visiting. Something about the place was very uncomfortable, even though it was comfortable. Bed was fine, room a decent size. It just didn't feel right. My mind wouldn't shut down, especially at night, and I struggled to sleep. The second or third night in, I was struggling to sleep still. My wife slept, though. Then everything went a bit weird. Kind of felt like a dream, but it wasn't. It also felt like hallucinating. But I knew it wasn't, because that's something I'd experienced before. It wasn't night terrors either. I get those, and I'm used to them. So understand when it's happening to me. And they're scary. But the room slowly filled with cats. They were gathering around my bed. And then people started appearing, standing around my bed, trying to talk to me. I say trying because they were saying stuff in English that I understood, but had no context to which I could comment or reply. They didn't get annoyed or agitated, they just acknowledged each other, tried to talk to me, individually came and went a few times. It only happened for a short amount of time, confused me rather than scared me, and the next thing I knew, I woke up and it was morning. I was happy to put it down to sleep problems, I guess, until I said to my wife that I thought I saw weird things in the night and wasn't sure if it was a dream. She asked if it was a cat. I told her that it was more than one cat. She was shocked and asked me if there were people too. I said, yeah, lots. And they were trying to talk to me. She was almost excited to explain that she'd been freaked out by how many ghosts she sensed being there, but didn't say anything because I asked her not to. She doesn't claim to be able to communicate with spirits, but she says that they're often aware of the fact that she is aware of them. But this time she felt as though she couldn't see her, or they couldn't see her. Even though they were interested in something in our room, she concluded that those spirits wanted something from me. The event made me reevaluate a few things. For example, when I get tired, like really, really tired to the point of fighting to stay awake. I see things, shadows in the corner of my vision. I've often interpreted these visions as a cat, always the same one. My wife believes there's a cat spirit with me, and has thought that long before this event. Maybe when I get tired enough, I see it. I now can't outright deny the possibility. My home we bought is haunted. And it's been interesting, because I'm an astrophysicist by trade, and it's been interesting to take what I know to be true in the universe and place that with what me and my family live with. All that being said, we adore her. I had probably the friendliest, most helpful ghost in the world. When we bought the house, we knew it was funky. Even weirder is 3 days after we moved in, I realized that I had seen this house before from the angle I was sitting on my couch. And it was in my dreams over various years. Anyways, the first thing we noticed was little things. If we left lights on, they would switch off. You would hear the click of the switch. I heard walking around in my son's room one day. Didn't think anything of it for a full 20 minutes, and then realized, fuck, I'm home alone. Like I heard this door open and walking around. Okay. Spooky but harmless. If we lose something, and we audibly say it's missing within around half a day, it'll be found in plain sight on a table or a couch. We always say, thank you. Our cats will arch up and purr like someone's petting them. My daughter's been tucked in before. She thought it was me. Nope. We love her. The only thing we have issues with is no laundry machines past 9 p.m. We have front locking loaders. Once they're started, it's a bitch to get them open. If someone starts late, you'll come down to the door open and the machine off. Only past 9. So now we just respect it. I don't know who she is, but this is her home too. We love her and we say thank you and talk to her. All of us do. Guests have told us her house is haunted without us telling them. My all-time favorite story is I have a friend who doesn't believe in ghosts, and she spent the whole day talking mad shit. She retires to one of the guest rooms, and within 20 minutes she comes down sobbing, and her ear is bright red. She was half asleep and she heard soft movements, and the whack, someone flicked her ear. She doesn't talk shit anymore, or stay over. That's the only time our lady's been aggressive, but I'm glad she's here. She and our family now is kind of creepy and weird and dumb as that sounds. She's our family. I saw a strange pale creature with backwards legs on my way home from work. So I don't typically believe in this kind of stuff, but I had a strange encounter a while back that I was telling my coworker about, and they insisted that I saw a rake. I've been doing some research since, and I had no idea what it was, and it looks very similar to what I saw. Anyway, I was driving home from work at 1:30 a.m. about 2 months ago and was headed down this typically busy side street. Except since it was late, there wasn't a lot of traffic, just a Jeep in front of me. As I was driving around a bend in the road, I saw in my peripheral this figure to my right by a sidewalk standing between two small trees held up by wire supports. The creature was standing kind of behind them. At first, I thought it was just a big, slender dog, like a white greyhound or a Great Dane that escaped, and seemed to be standing and barking at traffic by the sidewalk. I only noticed it as I began to pass it, but as I passed by, I quickly noticed that it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes, a hunched back posterior, and a long, stretched mouth like it was screaming. I was going about 45 miles an hour when I passed, and it was dark out. I thought to myself, yo, what the fuck was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror I saw the creature turn around and run toward the wood fence. But as it ran, I saw how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed pale with a kind of anorexic appearance. It moved strangely, and its leg joints were inverted and bent in opposite directions. At that point, I was seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me also slowed down, so I could only assume that they saw it too. We both kept driving as it was late and couldn't stop in the middle of the road. That situation really made my skin crawl. I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive home and debated if I should have called the non-emergency line to have an officer check it out, but I told myself that they would think I was an idiot. Now, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe that it was just a dog, but I can't stop thinking about how strangely it moved with its backwards knees. I haven't talked about this much, except to my coworker, because quite frankly, it sounds ridiculous. I'm just wondering what the fuck I actually saw, and if it's something that I should even be talking about. Or if I should continue to pretend that I never saw anything and just move on with my life. Please be kind. About 3 years ago, we had started working from home due to COVID. It was around June. I took my lunch at the usual time around noon. I would go outside to get some sun and watch my son play out. Unlike most days, this time outside was quiet. No kids were out. The sun was shining, but there was zero wind. A lady was sitting by the benches, where you sit to eat. I noticed her because she was the only one out there. She was facing my direction with her to the table. My son wanted me to record him, which I was. And at some point, I hear something, and my eyes, being stuck to my screen, noticed my son looking toward the benches. He had stopped doing his ninja moves and looked confused. I stopped recording, and in a moment, a black lady was walking towards us. She walked behind, around my son, stood there. Now I will describe her. The white part of her eyes were yellow. Her teeth were yellow. And when I say yellow, 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 she had this smile like petrified, like emotionless. She was wearing this dress/robe and matching turban. The fabric was white with a lilac color, a very small geometric pattern. She said, "Take a picture." I said, "Excuse me?" She said, "Take a picture," while she showed me something in her hand that looked like a AA, like a very old phone. I'm not really sure. I thought that it was weird, but I agreed. I pulled my phone that at this point was locked. I put it in front, and there it was. She was not on my phone. My son was there standing alone in the phone. I felt paralyzed. It took a second, and I just looked. She was there, but yet not on my phone. I saw my surroundings melt almost like a movie. I slowly got near my son that was next to her. I ran so fast I looked back 2 times. She didn't even blink. She was there with her frozen smile looking at me, watching me run, completely terrified. Couldn't speak for about 30 minutes. I remember thinking in my head that I'd lost my mind. My other 2 kids and sister were home, and I could only repeat, she was there, and she wasn't there. Had my first paranormal experience. So I'm a Scottish nurse. I qualified in October last year. I've worked in all kinds of places before, mental health, acute illness, even palliative care. And I have never had an experience like this. I have over 6 years experience in care and a year experience as a registered nurse. I started my job in mental health setting for older adults. Most of my patients have dementia. We don't have a lot of patients, and at this time we had 7. As a result of this, you really get to know your patients. You grow unusually close to them, as they're there for a long time and you spend a lot of time with them. Not the usual in and out that happens in most places. I happened to complete my final nursing placement in this clinical area and then took a job. There was a patient. Let's call her Rosie. Rosie was a 70-year-old woman who didn't have a diagnosis of dementia. In fact, she was the only patient who didn't. Rosie was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and emotionally unstable. They also queried Wernicke's disease, as she had a previous history of alcoholism. Rosie had ongoing issues with her family. She was a lonely woman, and her story really breaks my heart. She could be very demanding of nurse staff's time and attention, and could also be emotionally abusive towards them. Regardless of this, we cared for her day in and day out, as you do when you're a nurse. Rosie was hard work, I won't lie. But she had been in this ward a long time, and we all grew to really love her. We were all kind of the only people that she had to talk to. You call it inappropriate if you like, but we grew more like family and friends than patient and nurse. Of course, her nursing care was our priority, and we took care of her to a high standard, but we all just kind of viewed her as our communal crazy aunt. She had a very distinct high-pitched voice that I'll probably never forget, and she would constantly shout for a nurse in her bed, or from wherever she was, "Nurse, nurse, nurse!" over and over and over. Or sometimes she would call out our individual names, if she had a preference for who she wanted to see. Anyway, enough background. Rosie sadly and suddenly took very unwell last week. She had a bowel perforation which led to sepsis and kidney failure, and she died the day after she was transferred to another hospital. I was brokenhearted that she never died with us around her. We did really love her. She is sorely, sorely missed. Rosie died on the Tuesday that I wasn't back to work until that Wednesday. I really didn't think she would have died, and I never went to see her in the hospital because I was on my day off. I regret this, but she's gone now, and there's nothing I can do about it. We all miss her, and we're all very sad that she has died. I went back to work on Wednesday, and there was a feeling that I couldn't shake all day. I can't explain it, but I could just feel something. I chatted to Rosie all day, both in my head and out loud, while I sort of pottered about a room, or just as I was working. I told her that I missed her, and I wished that I could just talk with her one last time. Later on in the day, her daughter called the ward and asked if Rosie happened to have any rosary beads that we'd be able to pick up and put into her coffin. I said that her stuff had been packed away, but I'd go look through all of it and call back. I went to the storeroom and rummaged through the bags, and I couldn't see anything, so I decided to take everything out of the bags one by one, so that way I wouldn't miss them if they were there. Nothing. So I spoke out loud. "Rosie, it's a shame that you had so many sets of rosary beads, and you can't give these girls a set to put in your coffin. Come on, show me where they are." I looked around, and still nothing, so I went back to the phone and called her daughter. I told them I was really sorry, but I couldn't find any rosary beads. I did, however, find holy water and a picture of St. Jude. Once I came off the phone, I went back to the store cupboard, and what is right in front of my eyes sitting on top of the bag? I had just re-put all the stuff away, but the set of rosary beads. My first thought was, oh my God, Rosie listened to me. However, as time passed, I started to think it was just a trick of my eyes, and I just never noticed them. However, when I told the story to my colleague, who had packed all of her stuff away the day before, she had a shocked and confused look on her face and told me that she couldn't believe the rosary beads were lying on top of the bag. because she had put all of her quote-unquote holy things in the box in a cupboard, and I had no idea that the box was even there, and therefore never looked in it. When she showed me the box, she showed me the checklist that she had wrote of all of the items that she packed away, where they were, so that way we knew what she had and didn't leave them and to give the rest back. However, I didn't know this time, or I didn't know this at the time, and I started to believe, I've just not seen him. As a result of this, I spoke out to her again, and I said, Rosie, if you're really there, and that was you, and death isn't just blackness, please send me a sign that I can't afford to, fob off as a trick of the light. But please, whatever you do, don't scare me. About an hour passes, and I'm sitting, just writing up my nursing notes on the computer next to her old room, and all I hear is, "Nurse," in her voice. It was her voice, as clear as day. I looked over my shoulder into her room without hesitation because for a second I forgot she was dead. It clicked and every hair in my body stood to attention. I slowly turned my head to the hall and saw my colleague backing out of the treatment room, white as a ghost, as she uttered, absolutely terrified, "Did you just hear that?" And we both said at the exact same time without discussing it, "Nurse." I haven't stopped thinking about it since it happened. Does anyone have an experience with this? Does this mean that Rosie's stuck there? I don't want that for her. She wasn't happy there, and she was lonely. I don't feel her presence here so much now. A few days have passed, but I can't stop thinking about it. My eyes are totally open to a whole new world, and I need to know more. I've experienced seeing a doppelganger of my sister's twice. My uncle visiting us during the holidays more than once asked if we were standing near the cage of my mom's birds, and my sisters and I say no, because we're all watching TV, usually during late afternoon hours. What really shocked me to the core was seeing a doppelganger of my sister, and I chased it. I don't quite remember why I was being loud and making a ruckus in the house as a spoiled third grader, but I do remember it as something to do with my sister and her bracelet. It was time to eat lunch. My sisters were nowhere to be found, and I was pissed. I went outside and started calling my sister's name. I hear someone answer in the kitchen, but my sister suddenly ran away from me and went straight to the bird cages and behind the house. I was very angry at this and started running after her. But what was strange was no matter how long I ran, it seemed like I was stuck in the same position I was standing before I ran. It was like the cement I stood on stretched and stretched while my sister, quote unquote, ran with her back facing me without moving from her position as well. I was confused by this and soon ran out of breath. When I stopped suddenly, I snapped out of it, and my sister finally started moving from her place and disappeared behind her house. Funny thing was, I keep saying my sister's name, and my sister's voice from the kitchen was no way my sister that went through that wall. My real sister and my other sister were both in the kitchen. My mom got to caretake a really old castle keep, 14th century. The previous owner had died, and the family wanted to make sure vandals didn't get it. The previous owner was really old, so the building was in very basic living conditions, i.e., no kitchen, dodgy electrics. Obviously, it was the build, so it had so much history. It was officially lodged with 3 ghosts. We believe there's more than 11. The night we moved in, my mom decided that she wanted to get pictures up as the cats are assholes, and she didn't really want them broken. The next morning, all the pictures had been swapped about. We left them as they were. I heard a huge fight, throwing of plates. I crept downstairs, wondering who was having such a huge fight. My mom was on her computer and looked confused when I asked her who was fighting. I was the only one who heard it, apparently. In the stables, there was a horrible presence. It grabbed my sister, and she came back inside and started yelling at my brother at his prank. We were both cooking together. We got an electricity bill that would rival a large hotel. Since we only used a few rooms and heated with gas, we complained. The electric company sent a guy, and he said he had no idea where it went. We lived in the middle of nowhere. Stealing from us wasn't possible. Interesting thing is, when we moved out, the family renovated the building. After that, no more paranormal experiences were had. I honestly believe all the strange things that happened. So much on a daily basis that maybe it fed on the electricity or was amplified somehow. Ask Reddit. Several occasions I used to see things and experience stuff, but as I got older and more in control, I learned to block, so I experienced it less and less. Grandparents' house had a basement with a crawl space. My grandfather would go in there and move all of our stuff the previous owners had in there. I'd only go inside the crawl space when my grandpa was in it. He actually sealed it off so I wouldn't go in by myself. The crawl space was a small walk space that opened up to a small room, high enough for me to stand in. The odd thing is, the crawl space had another doorway that led into another room that was actually more spacious and had lots of small furniture, like a crib, a play table, and a bouncy horse. There was even a small cabinet and bowl that I remember. This bed frame that was small and had no mattress, but had its mesh on it where the mattress pad should go. My grandpa didn't go into that room and would shoo me out. It was stuff left behind by previous owners. I was 4 years old when I had made a friend, a little girl named Rachel. She was my age and always wore a yellow dress with a white apron, and she had a ribbon in her hair like a headband. She didn't talk much, but we played often in the basement and in her backyard. She would talk, but only in whispers, and we would go to a corner or hide behind furniture. She didn't like to go near the crawl space. She was kind of afraid of it. One day I tried to convince her it was safe by going inside myself. I went in and thought to show her the room with all the kid-sized furniture. She grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the room, shaking her head, eyes wide. Something jerked me back away from her. I looked back. It was a man with long, dirty fingers and wild hair, covered head to toe in dirt. And when he smiled, it was all fangs. Ran out of the crawl space screaming, into the backyard. When my grandpa came rushing up to me, I explained what we saw. He went into the crawl space with a determined look, then pulled out all of the junk in that room and aired them out into the sun. He then packed that room with insulation and boarded it up. I never saw the man again. But I also never saw Rachel. In fact, my family never had seen her. They say she was my imaginary friend, and I began to believe it. It wasn't until my 20s when my uncle revealed that when he used to babysit me, he once heard me talking to Rachel, and when he glanced over, he did see me talking to an outline of a girl glowing in a yellow dress. 2. When I was 10 years old, one of my houses my parents and I had moved into had a basement, and it was deep under the house. It covered the whole floor plan. My mom would go do laundry down there and would often notice all my old toys scattered on the floor from the storage boxes. She'd assume that I was downstairs playing with them and call me to go pick them up. I would, but I didn't play with these toys. They were all old, and I was always outside riding my bike with my neighbors. My mom figured out that it wasn't me spreading out the toys when she saw the old tricycle moving by itself as she was loading clothes into the dryer. And I wasn't in the basement with her. She just said in her best mom voice, "Don't try to scare me down here." And the tricycle stopped. I came face to face with the ghost when I woke up one night in my bedroom to find a little boy kneeling beside my bed and staring at me. He had his forearms resting on the mattress and was like leaning his head on the side of one of his forearms. I first thought that it was one of my cousins who's around the same age, so I sleepily say, "Hey, you come to sleep over?" When the kid didn't say anything and just kept staring, I leaned my face in real close, as in nose to nose close. That's when I saw that there were no whites in his eyes, and I could kind of see through him. I pulled away and then hid underneath my covers. We moved out shortly after. 3. 12 years old. Brand new house. Sitting at the dinner table with parents. Stepdad starts to go to hit me with his elbow, so I flinch. When I was smaller, he used to try to rip my face off. But since I was bigger, he just intimidated me with the fear of a potential beating. My mom was sitting across from me and sort of massaging her forehead. I could tell that he was talking shit to her, but she wasn't really taking the bait. It angered me. His voice, her silence, our whole situation. I could see my mom beginning to unravel, though, and she let out this sudden growl or roar, and at the same time I felt something hot like a curling iron close to the scalp, and several plates, including his, shattered. Nice thick cracks. He quieted down, he touched my plate and the other one that wasn't broken. Then he got up, still mumbling, but I heard the breaking in his voice. I looked at my mom, but she ignored what happened, so I did too. 13 years old, in a different country. Neighbors found a spirit board. We began to play with it. I admit to making it move the first couple of tries. By midnight, the thing was vibrating underneath our fingers and moving even when we were half awake. It spelled out, "Come back to me." When I asked in a teenage girly fashion which guy was the most interested in me and why he was thinking about me, I didn't realize at the time that my real father, the estranged one, was looking for me and was still pinned to be reunited with me and my mom. We were 20 years later. When the gossipy girls began to use the board, the tone changed to threatening, but it calmed when I used it. It's not something I would touch again, honestly. 5. High school and college, 16 to 17 years old. I began to have flashes of things about people around me. I kept seeing things like a classmate talking to a man that I didn't recognize, and I finally asked her about it. She admitted that she was seeing a boy off campus, and he was older. I began to turn into some parlor trick. At parties, I would have people gather around and I'd read them, usually seeing a scene that they recently experienced that I wasn't present to witness, but they would always confirm that it happened. Then I started seeing things about my friends, but they couldn't confirm. I saw one friend with a guy that she didn't recognize, and I saw her pregnant, but she had no boyfriend and wasn't pregnant. Then I saw my best friend with this guy on a boat, and we both knew that she wasn't dating and couldn't swim. So I began to think that I was losing my touch and stopped. We graduated college a couple of years later. The girl that wasn't pregnant, she graduated 5 months pregnant and was engaged to the guy who moved in the same boarding house. My best friend wound up meeting her husband on a ferry. He won her over by promising to jump in after her if she fell off the boat. 20 to 21 years old. While the plane I was on was descending toward LAX, I looked out the window and vividly saw a giant city made of black mist looming over the city on the ground. I first thought it was smog or rain clouds, but the shapes were too angular and too condensed together, and the sunlight reflected on the surfaces very sharply. It looked like a giant stony skyscraper landscape. I still try to search for it again, but I can't see it anymore. But I'm pretty sure it was there. I wish I had the presence of mind to take a picture of it. 7. When I first moved to California, I visited Colorado with the family. I visited Coronado with the family. We walked through this fancy hotel. My cousins were leaning over a railing, overlooking a pool, and I was walking over to them to stand by them. I was gazing at the pool as I walked over, and I saw a tall, slender woman in this giant black sun hat and black lace robe at the end of the pool. As I drew nearer to the railing, she had slipped into the pool and began moving across the water like she was going through it. But it was odd because she wasn't moving her arms or swimming. When I reached the railing, I asked my cousins if they thought the lady was swimming weird. They asked, "What lady?" The pool was empty to them, but I saw the lady by the edge of the pool again, kind of lurking over it. Come to find out, the Hotel Coronado is famously haunted. 8. I tend to avoid looking into people's eyes too intensely because I still got flashes of scenes. The last one happened during a job interview, and I saw the lady interviewing me in a flash scene. She was going at it with another man on her desk. The man was not the dude in her family picture, so I developed blocking stuff now that I think, or I've grown out of it. I used to read tarot cards, and the flashes come out that way, I think. I've seen pregnancies, grieving death, divorce, increased income, major life changes. I don't do it so much now, because the last reading I saw the passing of a loved one who turned out to be my grandpa, but didn't want to interpret as that, and it happened anyway. Ask Reddit. I lived in a 120 or so year old house that was on its last legs when me, my mom, and little sister all moved in. We never learned a lot about its history, but now I wish we had looked into it more before we left. It had to be interesting. It was a basic 2-story house which had a hallway leading from the kitchen to the bedrooms, with the living room doorway being about halfway between both. And I very distinctly remember one day when I was playing with my PlayStation in the living room that I heard a bedroom door creak a little bit. I didn't think much of it because the house was very noisy and I was kind of used to it. A second afterwards, I saw my mom walk down the hallway and brush past the coats that we had hanging on the wall. They all moved back and forth a little bit. What caught my eye was that she was wearing some sort of dress. Looking back now, it was more like an old-fashioned nightgown than anything, and I was wondering where she would be going dressed like that in the middle of the day. It was probably around noon at the time, so I yell for her not to be, getting off of my game, but when she doesn't reply, I hop up and run to the kitchen, turn the corner talking to her, freezing in my tracks when I see the kitchen is empty. I sit there for a split second trying to understand what happened, when I remember that my mom was working today. She had been at work for hours and my sister at school. I took a sick day off and I was home alone. It made my blood run cold standing there even though it was a bright sunny day. I wasn't a very gullible person when I was younger. I was very skeptical in nature and would often argue with my mom when she claimed the paranormal as reasons for noises and such. And I was not so young to misinterpret the memory. I was about a freshman in high school when this happened. And this was not a lone event. I had a friend from school who was over one day and experienced something similar. We were there watching my little sister. He didn't get specific with what he saw or heard, but whatever it was caused him to walk out of the house and walk home, which was probably a 45-minute walk. He refused to come back for weeks after I told him my story, too. And it still brings it up to this day. The last impactful story I remember right now happened to a family friend. I was in the hospital for a few weeks, and while I was there, my dog was alone at the house. Something I should point out is that the house hadn't been cleaned out in years. There were trinkets and furniture in that house that were there when the landlord purchased it in the 70s and 80s. And the basement had newspapers dated from the 50s, and some even earlier in a big messy pile. We never cleaned it out because we actually found a lot of those items interesting. So when I was away, we had a family friend that lived nearby go to the house and feed our dog. And when she went, she saw the dog and noticed that he was distracted by something else. Then she heard the music. She swears to this day that she heard jazz music playing and someone humming for a few seconds after walking in. When I went home, she went back to reenact the scene. And when we went upstairs to where the dog's food would have been, she noticed something that she hadn't before. There was a desk sitting in the corner with a pile of old jazz records sitting on it. They all hadn't been touched in years and had dust on them. We mostly used the upstairs for storage since it was so cluttered anyways. But after that, she never came back to that house. So wasn't a house, but worked in a haunted movie theater back when I was in college. Had a whole history. The building was a storage for circus animals in winter during the off-season. Burnt down. Got turned into a classical theater. Got bought out and turned into a single-screen movie theater. Later remodeled into a 4-screen theater, which was its incarnation when I started working there. Apparently 2 people had died there. One suicide, the other accident. You had the run-of-the-mill stories. Well, so-and-so was closing and all of a sudden the bathroom stall doors started opening and closing all on their own violently. Manager swore seeing a guy trying to hide between the last row of seats in the wall during the last walk. You couldn't fit a hand into that space, not less a grown man. You'd hear faint voices, stuff like that. The front theaters closest to the lobby were fine, but it was the back pair that were the issue, because you would go in and start cleaning and immediately feel like someone was watching you. So theater on the right, I'd call Joe, and theater on the left, I'd call Paul. Morning, Joe. Just sweeping up. Man, this is a bad movie, huh? Stuff like that. Joe was fine. Just wanted to hello and the place would feel fine. Paul was the asshole that'd leave the hair on the back of your neck up, or have you trip on nothing at all, and you'd just have to get into the habit of telling Paul to behave out of instinct. Worst encounter I ever had was doing my usher thing, sweeping up after the last show of the night. I'm by myself in the theater, projection guy hasn't made his way to the booth yet. Manager was counting the till in the office. Other closer is getting concessions stocked up front. So it's still low lights after the credits, music is off, and all of a sudden, it feels like someone is creeping up behind me. Don't hear anything, still sweeping, and bam, I get a jolt like when someone grabs you from behind and digs their fingers hard into your ribs, like that gotcha kind of thing. I whip up the middle row by myself, pretty much go fuck this, drop the broom and bin and just sprinted out of the theater up the hall to the lobby. Was too freaked out to check for marks, but I remember it felt like fingers digging into my sides. I guess my telling him to behave was taken as a, okay, smartass, let me give you a reason as to why you need to tell me to behave kind of thing. I refused to clean that theater solo. I'd only do it if the projection guy was in the booth or the other closer was with me. Ask Reddit. Living in one right now. We moved in around 20 years ago. I moved out for about 5 years and nothing happened to me then. I moved back and more shit's been happening since we started to renovate. but we're so used to things happening that we treat them like a child misbehaving for the most part. I'll start with the things that happened when I was younger. I was in the basement on my PC, chatting it up in the days of AIM and ICQ. Something grabbed my ponytail and violently jerked it so that my head snapped backwards. I thought it was my dad, as he was the sort to sneak up on you if you were engrossed or something like that. I jumped out of my chair and tried to yell at him, but nobody was there. I looked at the time and realized I was home alone, as my sister was out, my mom was at bingo, and my dad was still working in the oil fields up north. I snapped at the ghost to not do that again, but still made sure I turned on a few more lights. We have no air conditioning, so even though my bedroom is on the main floor, in the summers my sister and I would sleep in the basement because it was cooler. One night I'm on the couch and my sister's on the guest bed. I'm struggling to fall asleep, tossing and turning, so around 2 a.m. I roll over, annoyed, and I see a white, misty human shape near the foot of the stairs. I wear glasses, so I thought maybe it was just blurry eye gunk or something got in my eye. I try to rub them and clear them, and when I open them, the misty form is about 6 feet closer than it was before. I thought, fuck that. Rolled over to face the wall and shut my eyes. Didn't move until I fell asleep. There's a path that leads from the front around the side to the back of the house. There's also a gate that makes a distinct noise when the metal latch sort of catches. If we hear it, we know someone's here, so we can look out the windows to see who it is. Numerous times we've heard the latch and looked and seen no one on the other side of the house. It's even creepier in winter when there's fresh snow. We'll hear the crunch of footsteps in the snow, then the latch. More snow steps, then nothing. If we go outside to investigate, there will be no footprints. But one time the gate left marks in the snow from when it swung open. The lights in the laundry room. 2 or 3 times this happened. My mom was down in the basement doing laundry. She finished up, turned the lights off to the laundry room, and walked up the stairs. The moment that she took the first step into the laundry room, the light came back on. Terrified, she yelled for my dad to come down with her so that she wouldn't be alone to turn them back off. But once she was home alone, and she all but booked it up the stairs without touching them. My parents are huge on energy conservation. I always got scolded for leaving lights on, so this was out of character for her. The floating head. I was asleep in my room when I randomly woke up one night. Directly above me was a woman's disembodied head just staring at me. I stared at her for a few seconds to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing. Then I hid underneath the blanket and went back to sleep. After I moved back in, my dad died last year from cancer. We started renovations with some of the money from his life insurance. Since then, activity is ramped up. I'm a night owl, and on weekends I might not go to sleep until 4 or 5 a.m. One night it's 3 a.m. I'm walking through the pitch black house to my room. I pass the living room and a car drives by, just as I do, and the lights through the window alert me to the dark human shadow limping through the living room. I pause for a moment because when my dad was alive, he often got really bad, painful leg cramps in the middle of the night, and he'd pace around the living room to try to work them out. Sometimes I'd hear him from downstairs and come up and just get him some water, make sure he was okay. So he dies, and then I see this, and I just couldn't deal with it. I noped out and just bolted from my room. I slept with the light on. I got a puppy at the beginning of September. He's a little ball of fluff, and I love him. Last week he was sleeping beside my bed. I've been banished to the basement while my room gets a new rug and paint, and he jumps awake at 3:40 a.m. and starts raising hell, barking and growling. He seems focused on the center of the room, and it takes me a good while to work up the courage to turn on a light. But when I do, of course, nothing is there. Gambit calms down and brings his ball to an empty chair that we had brought down from the kitchen, which was getting new linoleum. Half of the kitchen and my bedroom are in the basement at the moment. He nudges it forward, then lays down and wags his tail like he wants to play. I turn on all the lights and get no sleep that night. 2 weeks ago, I jolt awake at 3 a.m. I'm groggy, half asleep, and there's a shadow right at the foot of my bed. Still in the basement, by the way. The shadow would be the perfect height of a grown adult if they were kneeling by the bed. The shoulders were quite broad, but it was just black, pure black, like a void. There's very little natural light coming into the basement at 3 a.m., but I can see how much it contrasts to the rest of the darkness. I stare at it, trying to figure out what it is. I sit up and lean forward, wondering why it isn't moving. I'm half asleep, remember? I try to touch it, but that doesn't work either. I slowly wake up and realize that, hey, maybe trying to touch the black void is a bad idea. So I roll over and go back to sleep, which seems to be my solution to all hauntings. There's more, like hearing voices and the pitter-patter of children's feet upstairs when it's 2 a.m. and no children in the house. The voices are rarely distinguishable. It always sounds like a muffled conversation is happening 2 rooms away. Although sometimes I think I've heard my name. My mom claims she feels someone in bed with her when there isn't. The bed will dip, like someone sat down or something. She's also seen shadows at the foot of her bed, but she says that she can't move when she does, where I can. So I wonder if she has sleep paralysis.